Ladies and gentlemen, first years, welcome. This is another video, this time about section 5.2.2, so the second part of 5.2. Today we're talking about plants again. Last time we talked about plants and how they grow in length, and we called this primary growth, where there's some cell elongation and then a cell divides, it splits up, becomes two cells and grows longer. This happens in the apex, in the top of a plant or all the way down on the tip of the roots. And there's also something like secondary growth. And secondary growth we observe it most of the time in woody plants. Let me show you something. So this is a picture, and this picture is quite full of things and all of colors alike. And it's primary and secondary growth in a 2-year-old woody stem. So what you see here on the left side is a stem which is thin on the top and wider on the bottom side. That's because some of the layers here became wider by means of secondary growth. If plants grow in a secondary way, if woody plants do so, we say they grow annual rings. An annual ring is made up out of two, you could say, colors. There's a light brown part and there's a dark brown part. The light brown part is where the cells are bigger, they grow faster, and they have thinner cell walls. We call it springwood because it's mostly formed in the spring. In the summer, the growth is slower and the cells become smaller but have thicker walls. We call that wood, we call summer wood. So summer wood and spring wood together forms an annual ring. If you look at this really difficult picture here, you see it is a stem and it's a cross section of the stem. There is something in the middle called pith, and you see the words, xylem and phloem. Remember, xylem was to transport water and minerals, and phloem was to transport nutrients that the plant made itself. On top of that is an epidermis, like your skin, to protect it. So if there's secondary growth going on, then the xylem is going to grow wider here. And therefore, more wood is formed in a tree. Right, so let's go to the next one. And this is also a cross-section of the tree, and now it's a bit more comprehensible, I think. What we see here is a growth ring, and a growth ring, as you see, is a dark part and a lighter part. And the dark part, again, is in summer. It's the summer wood, which is dense and small cells. And the light part is the spring wood. The spring wood is formed in spring, where the cells grow faster, the cells are bigger, and the cell walls itself are thinner. If you look at this, you see again xylem and phloem. So the phloem in a tree is the bark, the bast, and the xylem is the wood. If I can tell you a bit more about this wood, when the wood of a plant is all on the inside, on a certain moment there's no transport anymore inside of that really old wood which is on the inside. And therefore this wood becomes hardwood at the heart of the tree. The other wood on the outside of the tree is called sapwood. And sap is moisty, so there's moist in it, there's water in it, that's called sapwood. Sapwood. On the inside is the dry wood or the hardwood. This hardwood is of not so much use for a plant anymore. Here in this tree, at the Wanoa Sequoia Tunnel in Yosemite National Park, in 1881, it was a tourist attraction. What did they do? They cut out a tunnel inside this tree. Nowadays, people wouldn't do that anymore because you're harmful. It's very harmful to the tree. But we learned about that. We learned that trees could easily survive even if you cut out the hardwood. But the hardwood takes a role in keeping the plant upright. And this particular tree, as you can see, it was 2,000 years old and more than 70 meters tall. So removing hardwood is not always a problem. Going back to this one, you can't see it in this particular example, but if you look at the slice of a tree trunk, you sometimes see that not all rings are even in width. Some rings are smaller in width and some rings are wider in width. When it's wider in width, it means that in that year there was more food for the plant. There were more minerals, there was more water, there was more sunlight maybe, so it could also form more wood. Where the rings are really close to each other, it means there was less sun and there was less food and less water. Sometimes you see even a blackened part in a ring. Maybe there was a fire then. So you could say in the annual rings, you can also see the history of a tree. And you can also count those annual rings to count how old a plant is. And not only can you see how old a plant is at the annual rings, you can also see it in the branches. This is a branch, and this is figure 6 in your book. And you see it has a terminal bud, so that's the apex, the top, and it has lateral bud. Lateral means to the side, like we have in midrib and lateral veins. Remember, in a leaf. Also on a branch there is a lateral bud to the side and a terminal bud, which is all the way to the end. The terminal bud will grow into a flower, or it will grow into an extra part of this stem. So there's primary growth or flower growth. And lateral buds have growth to the side. It's also primary growth, or they form the leaves. But they leave scars in branches. And here in this picture you see a bud scale scar. So from the point of the bud scale scar onto the next terminal bud, that's the amount that it grew in 1 year. So also at the branches you can see from the outside how old they are. Let's move over to this picture here. So we see a bud scar here, a bud scar here. So we could say that this one is 1 year, 2 year, 3 years old now. See, it's also what it says, 3 years of growth. We can also see that our lateral buds here, leaf scars, and the apical or the apex bud, so the top bud. You see that from a lateral bud here in this section grew a new branch, a new side branch, and from the apical bud or the apex bud grew this part. So if this part is a really long part, it was a good year, there was a lot of food, there was a lot of sun, and if it's a smaller one, then there was less sun and less food for the plant. So the distance between the buds is the situation, the healthiness situation of a year. And the amount of bud scars tells you something about the age. Okay, so let me tell you something else. So this is a root tip, and root tips are all the way down. But how does a root tip know where to grow? Well, it turns out that root tips in their merisstems, they form starch granules. Starch granules, like other granules in plants, they do something. So there's those green granules, you know, as chloroplasts, right? They carry out photosynthesis, where they make their own nutrients. We have chromoplasts, which make a beautiful, attractive color in flowers or in fruits. And there's also starch granules. And starch granules are called amyloplasts. Amylose is the difficult word for starch. So starch is a heavy stuff. So it sinks to the bottom of a cell. And there are receptors in that bottom. When they're stimulated by gravity, when something pushes upon them, they grow that way. So by forming starch granules, amyloplasts, they sink to the bottom of the cell, and then the root knows where to grow. Because deeper in the ground, there's more water, so that's why it's a very healthy idea to grow downwards. On the other hand, plants, you also notice that plants grow to where the sunlight is, right? A sunflower especially does that all the time. You see it turning really towards the sunlight. So how does it do that? Well, it's due to a hormone in plants, and this hormone is called auxin. And auxin is a hormone which stimulates primary growth when there is no sunlight. It's a little bit strange this, but let me tell you again. So auxin is in all kinds of cells in plants, but where the light doesn't shine, it stimulates primary growth by taking up more water, make the cells longer and divide. So if on this side there's light, so auxin does not stimulate, so it breaks down growth. On the other side, there is light growing, and this light growing makes sure that the plant goes all the way. All right, so then the plant will bend into the sun. Okay. Yeah, that was it for today, actually. So I told you a lot. I told you about how plants grow secondary, so how they form new rings. I told you about annual rings, which are made of spring wood and summer wood. And I told you about the difference between terminal buds and lateral buds. And you can see on a branch how much it grew this entire year. And if it's a longer one, then the conditions were well. And I told you about why roots grow downwards and why stems grow towards the sun. Thank you very much for your attention. You can fill out all the exercises now from section 2. I wish you a pleasant day and bye-bye.